Hey everybody, we are back. We're in Proverbs 17, looking at verse 5 today. Really relevant one, I think. Whoever mocks the poor insults his maker. He who is glad at calamity will not go unpunished. He who mocks the poor insults his maker. This verse is all about class conflict, class resentment, and it's mostly aimed in one way, but I think that you can apply it in both directions. So first, let's look at this. Whoever mocks the poor insults his maker. God takes disparaging remarks, disparaging attitudes against the poor personally. Isn't that interesting to consider? That God doesn't just put himself on the team of the wealthy and successful, because some folks will put it out like that it's rich people. If God really loved you, if you were really following Jesus, you'd be rich, or you'd be powerful, or you'd have great health, or whatever. But that's just not always the case. The Bible tells us this over and over ago. Job tells us that. Ecclesiastes, another book of Solomon, tells us that. Jesus, of all people, demonstrated that, right? He said, "Blessed are the poor, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." And he primarily meant that poor in spirit, but in the Gospel of Luke, he said, the poor. So what this tells us is that God recognizes that these people are usually the downtrodden and put down of society. But we're not supposed to do that. We're not supposed to mock and look down on people that have less than we do. Now, let's say that you started out poor. Let's say you worked really hard and you worked your way to the top. And that's a great thing. The Bible tells us to do that. And if we can, to go for it. And in this country, you have an amazing opportunity to do that. But what can happen in that situation is you see how you were able to climb out of that. And you become kind of an expert on the attitudes and the bad habits and all the dysfunction that keep poor people down. And you can kind of resent and look down on them for that. Or maybe it reminds you of your past and you just don't want to go back and you're so terrified of that you have to be constantly beating them down. But the Lord tells us not to do that. Instead, you should have an attitude of compassion for these people. If you were so fortunate and so dedicated to be able to rise above hardship like that, then you should be able to go back and help somebody else, at least to teach them what you've done or encourage them. And you also should know that a lot of it has to do with things that are beyond your control. Not all of it, but a good measure of it. Some people are just given a tough break in life, and their ceiling is not as high as somebody else's. The Bible tells us that's nothing to be ashamed of, but it's also nothing to mock. And that brings us to the second bit here, where he says, "He who is glad at calamity will not go unpunished." I'm inclined to think that this verse came about as Solomon saw people mocking or celebrating or kind of tutting to themselves as somebody who was rich, lost everything, and became poor. That's the mockery of the poor, is they're laughing and being glad at his calamity. God says he'll punish you for that. And so now let's apply this to the poor. Let's look at the other side here. There are a lot of poor people, or maybe just middle class, or just kind of broke people, that are resentful of those who have more than they do and get a kick out of watching them fall. Watching them come down to their level, they just snicker and they laugh and they're like, well, it's about time. And they feel like since they haven't been able to advance, they don't want anybody else to advance or to remain higher than they are. There are a lot of politicians that try to exploit that sinful attitude in you to get you to be glad at the misfortune of the wicked or to mock the poor. And neither one of those should be done. According to the Bible, money is not a thing. There is no value that money adds to your person if you have it or don't. It tells the poor to be content with food and clothing, and it tells the rich to rejoice in their humiliation, that even if you lose everything, you've still got the most important thing, and that's you're being made in the image of God. Jesus Christ died for you. So, because we are all made in the image of God, we're not going to let physical things like somebody's bank balance determine how we're going to treat them. So don't mock, don't insult the poor, but don't be glad at somebody's calamity either. Be glad where God has put you and work hard to improve because he has approved that as well. God bless you. See you next time.